Welcome to the CapMatcher podcast, the podcast on your way to funding, digital matchmaking for early stage startups and investors on capmatcher.com. Hi, this is Max from capmatcher.com. CapMatcher matches investors with currently more than 1,000 manually screened early-stage startups with more than 1 billion capital demand. Today, we're going to talk about investors that invest in investors. This episode is part 3 out of 6 episodes regarding the most important technical terms and definitions for investors and startups. So if you haven't heard episode 1 and 2 already, please listen to these ones first, since they form the groundwork for today's episode. Now, you might ask, why is this series relevant for you and your startup? Well, if you have tried to dig into the topic of venture capital, then you have probably noticed that there exist many confusing and very technical terms regarding this topic. So we from CapMatcher thought that it might be the best way to simply record a podcast series about the topic. There's just no worse situation than having to talk with an investor without having the right knowledge for the conversation. And as you might know, in these conversations that should ultimately lead to a deal between you and the investor, there's just nothing more important than talking at eye level to each other. And an important contribution to this is that both sides possess the required knowledge about the topic of interest. Okay, enough said. Here are the investors that invest in investors. The first type of investor that invests in investors is the limited partner. Now, as mentioned before in episode number 1, a venture capital company does not invest in a startup itself. The venture capital company invests on behalf of the venture capital fund, which is usually a limited liability company. Now, you might ask, where does the money in this fund come from? This is the job of the venture capital company, which does not invest its own capital, but the capital of its investors. These investors acquire a share of the fund, in other words, of the limited partnership, and are therefore called limited partners with respect to their limited liability. So these investors can therefore monitor the process of the partnership without taking part in the day-to-day management if they want to keep their limited liability. Please note that there are many kinds of investors who can become a limited partner in an investment vehicle. In general, they are all considered professional or semi-professional investors. The now following examples are some investors that often invest in venture capital funds. The first one are the family offices. A family office is a private consulting firm which typically manages the wealth, tax, and estate planning of high net worth individuals and families. Often the capital has accumulated due to successful family-run businesses. For that very reason, family offices are keen to invest, but not necessarily in startups coinciding with the industry sector of the family business. The second one is the pension fund. A pension fund is a pooled investment fund ran by an intermediary on behalf of a government or a company to pay out pensions to the employees later on. Typically, pension funds use a portion of their assets as part of their risk capital investment strategy. The third one is the endowment fund. The long-term pool of financial assets held by many universities, hospitals, foundations, and other non-profit bodies is called the endowment fund. And the last one is the fund of funds, or short FOF. Obviously, funds can invest capital not just in startups, but also in other funds. An investment vehicle, which on behalf of its investors distributes its assets over a series of other funds and not directly to private companies, for example, is referred to as a fund of funds in this context. Now you should have a very good overview over the investors that invest their money in other investors. In the next episode, we are taking a look on the venture capital characters. It's going to be a very interesting episode, so stay tuned and we hear us in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the CapMatcher podcast. Did this episode make you curious? Then visit our site at capmatcher.com.